Map design has always been essential to the successful flow of multiplayer shooters, but how do you create war zones in which acrobatic pilots and hulking mechanical robots both have their place? Today on The Next Big Game, we break apart the anatomy of a Titanfall map.
Take Charlie back now.
Titanfall is a game where you play each map in two fundamentally different roles, a person with a jetpack and a massive mechanical robot, so fundamentally, Titanfall maps have to be two levels in one. On the pilot level, you have interiors with doors, rooms, corridors. You have a place to hide from gunfire, corners to camp in, and shelter from the Titan-fueled madness outside. While as a Titan, the terrain and buildings act as your corridors. So, pilots own the interiors, while Titans rule the outdoors. So, how do you level the playing field once they meet in battle? The key, it seems, is verticality. The maps in Titanfall have been built with vertical pilot movement as a key component. You notice it the first few times you play. Initially, you will likely run into a building and start running upstairs like you would in any other first-person shooter. But once you start getting comfortable with wall running, the way you look at each map changes, reminiscent of the verticality of classic first-person shooters like Unreal Tournament and Quake. And for the design team, the key to getting the players to move this way was encouraging them to look up.
If you have a mechanic like wall running, you need psychologically the player to feel like they can go there. There's this fine balance of the way we design the surfaces of the buildings, the height. I mean, all of the buildings are kind of designed in such a way where you can just barely make it with a double jump.
And just the freedom you have as a pilot, being able to look at environments and go to places that you've really never been able to do in any other first-person shooter. Feels great.
You know, you have to realize that there's now another dimension. You can jump up, get to places where you couldn't before in other games. So I think it takes people a little while to snap into that. You know, some people get it really quick. Some people it takes, an hour or two before they're really, comfortable with it, and they'll, oh yeah, that's right, I can jump up into that window.
The first thing I do as a player now, knowing the game the way I do, is I'm kind of looking at my options for wall running and how I want to string things together or how I want to ambush another player as a Titan. And so we worked really hard, all the textures, all the geometry, to kind of encourage that type of thinking once people understand the mechanics of Titanfall.
However, as Titans, the maps feel totally different, a collection of routes and corridors which bleed into larger areas that act as flashpoints for combat, evocative of the lanes and squares in Counter-Strike, and this is no more apparent than when you play the Pilots vs Titans mode, the tight alleyways between buildings forcing you to find cover. Right now we've only seen two maps from Titanfall, so the question remains, how much more variety will we see, both in terms of map size and variety?
No, we definitely have some levels that we haven't shown yet that are a little bit different. There's some, there's size difference definitely. In some respects you want this area where the Titans can play, this area is where the pilots can play, and how those two, they can't be separate. There have to be some interplay in between those. So it's building these two levels that work very well together. Some levels are a little more open, like Fracture is a little more open than Angel City, which is very tight. So I think we have levels that are even bigger than, or more open than like a Fracture would be.
What we worked towards was to make sure that the levels had a real hardcore identity to them, and they had a fiction behind it, which goes back into the campaign multiplayer. There is, with every level in the game, they each have their own fiction. I mean, the concept of the environments was really to build a relatable environment to players. Since we're asking so much of them to learn all these new mechanics, give them an environment that they can understand at the same time, but always feeling kind of used and lived in and not pristine and clean.
All units.
And that was the anatomy of a Titanfall map, but we're not quite done with Respawn just yet. Tomorrow on The Next Big Game, I sit down with Respawn co-founder Vince Ampella and ask him about life after Call of Duty. See you then.